Good afternoon, dear students. As you already know, the skull topic has been divided into 3 classes. First class has been already finished. Today I am going to start with the skull 2. Skull 2. Learning objectives. At the end of class, students should be able to first explain the general features of Norma lateralis. Second, explain the general features of Norma occipitalis. Third, explain the general features of Norma basalis. Norma lateralis. Key points. Bones. Frontal bone, parietal bone, occipital bone, temporal bone, sphenoid bone, zygomatic bone, mandible bone, maxilla bone, and nasal bone. Norma lateralis. Key points. Temporal lines. Supramastoid crest. Zygomatic arch. External acoustic meatus. Suprameatal triangle. Mastoid part of temporal bone. Asterion. Posterolateral or mastoid fontanelle. Mastoid process. Mastoid foramen. Norma lateralis. Key points. Styloid process. Temporal fossa. Pterion. Infratemporal fossa. Pterygopalatine fossa. Norma lateralis. The bones forming the norma lateralis are frontal bone, parietal bone, occipital bone, temporal bone, sphenoid bone, zygomatic bone, mandible, maxilla, and nasal bones. The bony landmarks present in Norma lateralis. The temporal line. The temporal line begins anteriorly from the frontal process of zygomatic bone. It crosses the coronal suture. After crossing the coronal suture, it divides into 2 lines on the parietal bone. One is the superior temporal line, which fades out posteriorly. Inferior temporal line continues towards the mastoid part of temporal bone. The elevation over here is called supramastoid crest. The zygomatic arch, which is formed by temporal process of zygomatic bone and zygomatic process of temporal bone. The opening here is the external acoustic meatus. The area over here is called suprameatal triangle. It is bounded above by supramastoid crest, anteriorly by the margin of external acoustic meatus, and posteriorly by a vertical tangent joining these 2 lines. This is mastoid part of temporal bone. This area is called asterion. 3 sutures join over here. This is parieto-mastoid suture. This is occipito-mastoid suture. This is lambdoid suture. In fetal skull, there is one membranous gap over here, which is called as posterolateral or mastoid fontanelle. It fuses at the age of 12 months. This elongation over here is called mastoid process, and there will be one foramen behind this process which will be called as the mastoid foramen. There will be one process over here that is called as stelloid process, that I will be dealing in the Norma Basalis. The area over here is called as temporal fossa. In the floor of temporal fossa, there is one H-shaped area which is called as the pterion. Many sutures unite over here. This is the weakest point of the skull. Anterior branch of middle meningeal artery is lying behind this. The bones joining over here are frontal bone anteriorly, parietal bone, squamous part of temporal bone, and greater wing of sphenoid. In fetus, there will be one membranous gap over here that is called as anterolateral fontanelle, which fuses at the age of 3 to 4 months. The area over here below the zygomatic arch is called as infratemporal fossa. This area or this fissure is called pterygomaxillary fissure, and there will be one fossa in this fissure that is called as pterygopalatine fossa. Norma occipitalis. Key points: bones, parietal bone, squamous part of occipital bone, mastoid part of temporal bone, sutures, lambdoid suture, occipito-mastoid suture, parieto-mastoid suture. Norma occipitalis. Key points: highest nuchal line, external occipital protuberance, inion, superior nuchal line, inferior nuchal line, external occipital crest. Now, Norma occipitalis. The bones forming Norma occipitalis are parietal bones, squamous part of occipital bone, and mastoid part of temporal bone. The suture present in these normas are lambdoid suture, occipito-mastoid suture, parieto-mastoid suture. The bony prominence here, this is called as the external occipital protuberance. The point in the center of this external occipital protuberance is called inion. There will be one more point higher to it that is called as occipital point, which is the farthest point from the glabella anteriorly. Just at the side of this external occipital protuberance, there will be one line that is called as superior nuchal line, which will be on the either side. If you will see below, there will be inferior nuchal line on the either side. Sometimes there will be highest nuchal line. Here we are lucky to see this highest nuchal line in this on the either side. This is the highest nuchal line. This elevation from external occipital protuberance to the lower down over here, this is called as external occipital crest. Norma Basalis. Parts: anterior part, middle part, posterior part. Anterior part, key points: alveolar arch, hard palate. Anteriorly, 2/3 by palatine process of maxilla. Posteriorly, 1/3 by horizontal plates of palatine bones. Suture, cruciform suture, incisive fossa, greater palatine foramen, lesser palatine foramen, posterior nasal spine, palatine crest. Now, Norma Basalis. For study convenience, the Norma Basalis is divided into 3 areas: anteriorly, hard palate. From the posterior border of hard palate till the anterior margin of foramen magnum is the middle area. Behind this line is the posterior area. For description of Norma Basalis, we have used one real skull and one synthetic skull, because in real skull few bony landmarks are already been damaged. That's why I will be comparing both a synthetic skull and a real skull. So now I am describing the anterior part. Anterior part has alveolar arch and hard palate. The hard palate is formed by palatine process of maxilla and horizontal plates of palatine bone. The suture over here is called cruciform suture. This suture is formed by intermaxillary suture, interpalatine suture and palatomaxillary suture. Anteriorly, there will be one foramen in the midline, and over here also this will be the incisive foramen. Posterolaterally on either side we will have greater palatine foramen. Just behind to it we can have 1 or 2 foramen, that is called as lesser palatine foramen. The projection in the midline in the posterior border of hard palate is called posterior nasal spine. The projection over here behind the greater palatine foramen is called the palatine crest. Middle part, key points: median area, vomer, broad bar of bone fused by body of sphenoid and basilar part of occipital bone, pharyngeal tubercle. Middle part, key points: lateral area, sphenoid bone, pterygoid process, greater wing. 3 parts of temporal bone: petrous temporal, tympanic plate and squamous temporal. Pterygoid process, pterygoid plates, pterygoid fossa, scaphoid fossa, pterygoid hamulus. Middle part, key points: greater part of sphenoid, infratemporal surface, foramen oval, foramen spinosum, carotid canal, foramen lacerum, tympanic part of temporal bone, squamous part of temporal bone. Now the middle part, which extends from posterior border of hard palate till the anterior margin of foramen magnum. This area is again divided into 2 areas. that is the median area and the lateral area on either side. Median area is formed by vomer bone. Superiorly, this vomer bone divides into two ala and forms one joint with the rostrum of a sphenoid. This broad bar of bone, it is formed by the fusion of posterior part of body of sphenoid bone and basilar part of occipital bone. The bony projection over here, this is called as the pharyngeal tubercle. Now the lateral area of middle part. The lateral area of middle part has a sphenoid bone. Again, the parts of sphenoid bone over here is the pterygoid process and greater wing. Now, here are three parts of temporal bone. This is petrous part of temporal bone, which will be seen nicely from the interior of cranial cavity. So, I will be describing this during the cranial cavity. Then, this is the tympanic plate and this is the squamous part of temporal bone. In pterygoid process, there will be two plates. This is lateral pterygoid plate and this is medial pterygoid plate. One fossa over here in the medial pterygoid plate. This is superiorly. This is called scaphoid fossa, and the projection over here in the medial pterygoid plate on either side inferiorly is called pterygoid hamulus. And a V-shaped fossa between these two plates, lateral pterygoid plate and medial pterygoid plate, is called the pterygoid fossa. Now, in the infratemporal surface of greater wing of sphenoid, the fossa just behind the lateral pterygoid plate, which is oval in shape, is foramen ovale. Posterolateral to it, another small foramen will be there. This is the foramen spinosum. Medial to the foramen ovale or lateral to this basilar part of the occipital bone is the foramen lacerum. This is the tympanic part of the temporal bone, and again this is the squamous part of the temporal bone. Posterior part key points. Median area, the foramen magnum, external occipital crest, lateral area, condylar part of occipital bone, squamous part of occipital bone. Posterior part key points. Lateral area continued. Hypoglossal or anterior condylar canal, posterior condylar canal, jugular foramen, styloid process and stylomastoid foramen. Now I am describing the posterior part. Again, the posterior part is divided into two areas, the median area and the lateral area. The median area has one huge foramen which is called as the foramen magnum. We will see external occipital crest, which is a continuation again from the external occipital protuberance, which we have already dealt in the Norma Occipitalis. The lateral area have the condyles of occipital bone, which articulates with the first cervical vertebra to form the atlanto-occipital joint, and laterally by the squamous part of occipital bone. There was one more canal present in the petrous part of temporal bone, which was part of the middle area of the Norma Basalis. This was the carotid canal. And when coming back again to the posterior area, the lateral area especially, just behind this carotid canal, we'll find one foramen which is called as jugular foramen. Now behind this jugular foramen or in front of these condyles, this is called anterior condylar canal or hypoglossal canal. Behind this condyle again we will have one more foramen on either side, that is the posterior condylar canal. As I have already told you, I am going to show one more process which was broken over here. This is called as styloid process, and this we have already talked, this is the mastoid process. We will find one foramen in between these two. This is called as stylomastoid foramen. Thank you.